MultimediaJay radio style.
Okay, back to my regular way of mixing together these podcasts. I was fooling around with an AM radio filter earlier and maybe taking the radio style thing a little too literally, but I liked the results because I've listened to folks on AM radio before, and the way I mixed it together and the thing in Audacity, getting my programs mixed up. The thing in Audacity for it is spot on. Absolutely spot on. Anyways, this is nothing fancy. It's just a discussion of what's coming in 2020, and it's being treated like a follow-up segment. In a way, you could say that I'm following up on the entire decade, because as we know, with the arrival of 2020 is the arrival of a new decade in addition to a new year. And as much as I was celebrating 2013's arrival after the rotten year that was 2012, I am more than willing to say that the 2010s can rot in hell just like 2012. The majority of this decade has felt like running up a down escalator for me. No matter what I do, nothing I do matters anymore, and even when things get better, they inevitably get worse. Every single time. And not a thing that I've done has made any headway in breaking this cycle. Just disappointment, 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 frustration, 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 feelings of hopelessness, hopelessness, hopelessness. Like I said, running up a down escalator. And this is no way to live. At all. Period. There is not one thing that I'm involved with right now that isn't a never-ending well of frustration. Let's rattle them off. Jay's Geek House, where I live. The landlord isn't doing as good a job as he used to in managing who he has in these units. There are apartments in the Geek House's neighborhood that I'm expecting there to be some kind of neighbor war at some point, because apparently there's a tenant that has a medical marijuana card, and Massachusetts legalized marijuana, so there's dispensaries and stuff. So anybody that can make the road trip over the border into Massachusetts, of course, well, you know, Connecticut has it partially decriminalized, but these are Northeast liberal states we're talking about here. I imagine at some point we're going to have to figure out what you do in cases of things like hotboxing, skunk weed, people stinking up neighborhoods, and they're so high most of the time they don't realize how much they smell. All these things that weren't a thing before that now folks have to figure out, municipalities need to figure out, etc. And in particular, situations where people are worried about losing their jobs because their neighbor smokes marijuana legally and they go into work smelling like it because it's going through like vents and stuff and going into their unit. Now, there's already a common law approach to this, which would be nuisance type stuff. But common law, as the term might suggest, can often be a first and worst kind of way of addressing these issues. For example, loud music falls under nuisance stuff if you're being kept up at night by someone blasting music. And yet how many people living in apartments have problems with loud neighbors? It's practically a stereotype. If you go looking for nuisance stuff, you'll probably see some example of loud neighbors given as an example of that, because it's so widespread of an issue. So, yeah, sure, you can talk about creating a nuisance because your apartment always smells like skunk weed, but, and that's really the thing here. And that's really the thing here. In the name of keeping the units rented, the landlord is basically ensuring some kind of turnover, because if you tick people off, surprise, surprise, they leave. And with the people that have moved in and out of the units in the Geek House's neighborhood, not just this particular property owner's units, but all of them, there are people coming and going so much that I don't know how the heck these landlords make any money. So when you're constantly having to advertise, constantly having to fill units, and it's like Teflon to find any tenant that's going to stick around any decent length of time. So, but that's kind of a parallel to what's going on with the job market right now. I know of places that can't find good help or can't keep good help, or some combination of both, including the 9-to-5ers. But we'll get to that. Let's talk about YouTube. So just over on Twitter, I recently posted and recommended that you go watch one of V. Westlife's videos. He's having problems with YouTube. He's having problems with YouTube and the copyright system over one of his videos where he fiddles around with a cassette deck. And as I saw this thing that he posted over on Twitter, I couldn't help but think this is a mixed bag thing. Yeah, it's annoying for V. Westlife, but it technically counts as YouTube trying to make progress. Apparently a system has been deployed, and this is the system that glitched out on V. Westlife. A system has been deployed so that copyright owners who want to issue DMCA takedowns can issue a delayed takedown, which gives the other party a chance to respond, maybe try and work things out, or take the video down without incurring disciplinary action on their channel. In the case of what I retweeted, though, this is a glitch that it can only be described as a glitch by some automated system, because the takedown in what V. Westlife shared is scheduled for December 31st, 1969. And this falls right in line with the mixed bag experience, or the mixed bag that I'm getting from the way YouTube communicates with creators. Yes, they are a platform that is struggling. They're beset on all sides by folks trying to embroil the platform in scandals and bad press and other stuff like that. There's all kinds of stuff that keeps constantly landing YouTube in the news. And I know that they're struggling because of the uptick in retention language in things like the Creator Academy, Susan Wojcicki's public appearances and speeches and going on other people's videos, and just the kind of literature that's being passed along to the creator community. So I can tell YouTube is struggling. I'm also seeing more advertising, and not just advertising in terms of more ads when you watch a video, but also YouTube showing up in commercials on like TV and stuff. So the best businesses don't have to advertise. Also, these changes for changes' sake happening more and more frequently. Fixing things costs money, so the more that YouTube works on their stuff, the more that cost goes up. So I don't think they'd want to be modifying stuff unless they see some actual value that offsets those costs with the various changes that they keep making on a more and more regular basis, like the changes to the channel layouts and stuff like that. Yeah, it's annoying that features have been retired and deprecated, but from a cost perspective, I can see things like, for example, I can see the value in no longer allowing a lot of custom graphics on the channel, even custom colors and things along those lines. So that doesn't surprise me. But at the same time, what we have here with this situation with V. Westlife and the takedown for December 31st, 1969, it falls right in line with this dual, two-faced approach to these things. Because, yeah, this is a system that folks are looking for, but it's also yet another example of folks being frustrated in the Twitterverse, so to speak, with how YouTube is these days. And this thing where, yeah, they want to change things, but it's persistently frustrating. It really is a chill on creators wanting to make content, especially part-time creators like myself, who are not depending on a YouTube channel to pay bills. The big channels will complain loudly about what it's like to be on YouTube, but ultimately they don't really have a choice unless they just go back to having some other kind of job. But the part-time folks like myself, who can just take a break from content and it's not really all that much except a little less fun money, if that it's a completely different story altogether. One major oversight, and this is the sort of thing where YouTube would have to decide to implement this, is perhaps one of the things that they could do for some of these copyright issues I keep seeing, where somebody has a short amount of background music or something, and the record company tries to claim ad revenue. First off, the system needs to support multiple claims that divvy up the ad revenue. I personally would like to see a system where everything is scaled. So if you monetize a video where you're walking through like a shopping mall or something, and you get a copyrighted song for like a minute or so, if you have a 10-minute video and you have 1 minute of copyrighted content, you can split it 9-1, so to speak. You can split up the revenue based on how much time the copyrighted content takes up in the video versus its entire play length. So let's make it simpler here. If you have a 4-minute video with 2 minutes of background noise that's copyrighted, it can be split 50-50, between the revenue can be split 50-50 between yourself and the copyright owner because you're using their stuff, so they get a cut because you use their stuff. I'm curious if the record companies or other folks would actually spring for something like this, especially if the system is robust enough to have the revenue divvied up multiple ways. So if you have a video with incidents of copyrighted songs multiple times, you can actually have the revenue divvied up multiple ways between yourself and all the rights holders. I think even the record companies might spring for that, because if you can have, for example, multiple record companies monetizing parts of the same video and the creator still making money in, with a scaling amount, then that would probably be a substantially more fair system than what we currently have right now, where it's winner take all, and it creates this incentive for someone to try to be the winner that takes all. And if it's not, as it was in the case of V Westlife, A&M Records, because of a song that I recognize as Gino Vanelli's I Just Wanna Stop, which makes sense because that's the record company that song was published under. Besides the actual record company, it could also be some third party posing as the record company, or, some company that exists to monetize content, and they have deals with various rights holders, and then they go scouring YouTube for them. So basically an outsourced service. Any business that exists because of the revenue that can be made from monetizing complete videos where people have small amounts of copyrighted content. And YouTube has tried to address small amounts of copyrighted content in a simpler manner with some of their updates that I've read more recently. But I think the fairest system they could do, although it's the most technically complex on their end, is to make it where you can have multiple claims from multiple rights holders on the same video, and the revenue is divvied up based on the amount of time the content is featured. Whether or not that YouTube wants to go as far as to make it overlapping or something and figure that part out is a totally different story. But I think any kind of system like that, although it would require more technical work on YouTube's part, would be more fair than this current system that encourages somebody to try to be the winner that takes all, in a situation where somebody makes like a 15-minute vlog and there's like 30 seconds of some kind of copyrighted music in there that the record company or some third party or some outsourced service tries to then claim all of the ad revenue because of that instance, which is a minority of the time in the video. But the question is, does YouTube want to take these steps? Lastly, in our big list of frustrations, we need to talk about the 9-to-5ers. For the past couple of months, I've been working a position that I stepped up to the plate for because of a perceived business need and perceived business pain at the machine we have that palletizes things over in shipping. Not only did I perceive that there was business pain that I could solve over there and perhaps do things better than a lot of the people that run the machine, including the day shift guy who's the incumbent and the veteran who trained me on this matter. Besides that, I also felt like some of the people that were in the pick mod that I was in and never ever left, I was curious if doing that for too long made you look like you didn't step up to the plate and take initiative to better yourself. That you're the kind of person that waits to be told what to do instead of being a go-getter and stuff like that. Somebody who will actually step up to the plate and do stuff without having to wait for someone to order them around. The kind of self-starters that we tend to look for with a lot of the engineered positions that we have. So keep that in mind. I consider what's gone on since I went to this position to be a form of stepping up to the plate. The initial experience is basically a referendum, so to speak, or how the management views me stepping up to the plate. And the very clear message that I've received October, November, December from how things have gone is that stepping up to the plate gets you punished, and speaking up about stuff puts a target on your back. Not the response folks want to hear, but ultimately it is what it is. And like I've said, going all the way back to the 2012 layoffs, actions speak louder than words. If you start feeling like people consider you a basket case because you bring things up, that eventually affects how you do things. Basically, I keep running into the same people doing the same things over and over again. And I have internal discussions to deal with these things internally with supervisor, manager, etc. But from the perspective of Jay outside of work, which is missing from the entire discussion, and the YouTube folks might find more enlightening, the big thing to remember in all of this is that talent is a market. You always have to keep an eye on what your competition is. I see the changes in who is coming through the door as Gen X becomes the oldest folks in the workforce. Us millennials like myself are now in the middle, and the Gen Zs coming through the door are showing signs of the kind of childhoods they had, with the kind of wired culture they grew up in, growing up with smartphones and being adversely affected at a much younger stage in their life by the recession than millennials and Gen X. It shows in their behavior, it shows in their mannerisms, and it shows in how they do things. And I think ultimately what's going to happen with companies in general across the board is that there's probably going to be some kind of showdown when Generation X takes power from the retiring baby boomers. That it's probably going to be Gen X versus Gen Z, with millennials kind of splitting everything up in the middle and choosing which side they're on. Because Gen X has this reputation for being the biggest supporters of traditional technology, and of course Gen Z grew up with smartphones. That's ultimately going to lead to very different approaches to things like what do you email? What do you get on the phone about? What do you say on Facebook? What do you say at work? What do you say here? What do you say there? And I think that a lot of things are going to change as Gen Z and Gen X bounce things off each other in the workplace, with the differences in how they operate because of how they were brought up. Let me give you an example, because time has also caused some generational differences as well. I've been involved with this place going all the way back to the mid-2000s. Once upon a time, I wandered into this warehouse just to drive forklifts or something until something technical opened up that would use more of what I went to school for. The rest is history. The brass at the time recognized the talent that had wandered into their building and embraced it and tried to make opportunities to advance or use more of what I went to school for, and the rest is history. However, when I first arrived, Generation X was the bulk of the workforce. Millennials were the newcomers. And Gen X had their usual, mostly 90s influence issues and things like that. But once upon a time in those days, if you worked in a warehouse, there's probably some bad reason as to why. Like, you dropped out of high school, or you had a record or something along those lines. If you worked in a warehouse, it was kind of a derogatory thing to say that you were a warehouse worker. So, what's the matter? You couldn't apply yourself? You couldn't get a better job? You couldn't go to college or something like that? Or, you went to college. You wound up working in a warehouse. That's the thing. There was this stigma with warehouse work. But in the case of this area, the warehouses were actually kind of the disruptor in terms of the talent market, because warehousing was actually a way to get higher, more reliable pay than a lot of other stuff around here. I'm not the only person who's college educated that worked in a warehouse because it was the warehouse wild card. In some cases, particularly in my case with computer information systems, as technology has gotten devalued since I graduated, and tech workers have been devalued so much that I've even seen help desks paying minimum wage advertising from Massachusetts. So it's possible to be a minimum wage computer tech. Welcome to our world nowadays, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm not the only person that I've encountered over the years who was in the warehouses because of the warehouse wild card, where it was actually more worth it to pick orders or load trucks or something like that in a warehouse than it was to actually be in the field you went to school for, simply because of differences in the size of the businesses, the size of the companies, all kinds of businessy type stuff like that. It was a real disruptor around here. That's what I walked into. Also, Gen X was most of the workforce at the time, maybe a few boomers getting ready to retire, and millennials were the newcomers. Fast forward to today, Gen X is in the older part of the workforce, us millennials are in the middle, and Gen Z is getting established, maybe, and that's the key difference. There are massive differences because of what has changed since I've been with this place. For example, retail, getting sick of their own turnover, trying to raise wages to not be so far behind everything else, has created an environment where the Gen Zs that are coming through the door, now granted, remember, we're talking about people whose childhoods were adversely affected by the Great Recession. So I see a lot of the nervousness in a lot of the Gen Zs that the generation is becoming known for at work. I'm reading articles about, Gen Zs are a little timid in the workplace. They may be a little socially awkward compared to everybody that came before them. I can believe that. It's very, very different seeing young people working in a warehouse that aren't rebellious as all heck, like I've seen over the years. There actually is a timidity that I see to the 20-somethings coming through the door. And not only that, there is this timid approach to staying with a team for a long time as well, because of the wage gap being closed to an extent between distribution and other places. Now you have people, now the stigma of working in a warehouse is pretty much gone at this point. It's just a job. It's just what you do. There's people that are coming and working in the warehouse because it's a job they can do for a bit here, then they go work in a factory there, then go work in a restaurant, it's just a job. That's the thing. There isn't the kind of team spirit and folks sticking around for decades like we've seen with generations gone by. Of course, I haven't been in the workforce long enough to establish that yet, but I just see a difference in the attitudes. I don't see the kind of gung-ho, go-team type stuff that I used to see with these folks that are coming in. The good news with the timid side of Gen Z, though, is I would rather have a team full of people that are a little nervous every single night than a team full of people that are starting drama every single night. These folks are a little timid, they're a little socially awkward, but they come in and they get the job done. Maybe they don't stick around like folks used to back in the day because it's just a job, much like, I'm going to work in this warehouse for a bit, then I'm going to go work in this factory for a bit, blah, 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 like we just said. I'm going to go work in this restaurant for a bit. It's just a job. There's no stigma, and the warehouse wild card has been kind of diffused a bit by the changes in wage structures in this area. But because of this weird stuff that's going on, because the people coming into the building have a very different attitude towards working here than just about anybody who's come before them. Their behavior is different. Their attitudes are different. They grew up with smartphones. They're kind of a little awkward when they're not on their phone all the time. I mean, it's just all these generational differences and whatnot. But for the first time ever, I'm actually in an environment where I actually gel better with the less experienced folks in the team, because the more experienced folks have different attitudes from a different era and more of a chip on their shoulder or whatever. You'll encounter the drama and you'll encounter the bad attitudes from the folks that have been there longer. Whereas the newer folks, little timid here and there, maybe trying to get up to speed on certain parts of the business and stuff like that, but they don't start drama. And in some cases, they're big-time team players. There are a couple of folks in this group that stick out for the right reasons, from my perspective. And they're people that I'm glad that they work together so well, and they're friendly and cordial and stuff, because it's a brilliant contrast to what I've been seeing from the same folks over and over again who've been there longer. And that's been the thorn in the side of this entire experience, because I don't think these people know my side of the story, and if they do, I don't see them respecting it. But just for the heck of it, let's recap. I stepped up to the plate to do this. I noticed there was business pain in this area that could be very well taken care of by somebody like myself with a tech background and a background in partially automated places where machines and people are working together, which I dealt with in some of the areas that I've been in before with these folks. Likewise, I'm also interested in working with stuff with moving parts a little more, because if automation and robots are going to be involved in places in the future, I might as well know how to deal with them, how to work with them, and eventually how to service them. Somebody's going to have to fix those things. So I actually, despite my CIS, computer information systems roots, I'm actually legit curious about getting enough of a mechanical background to be a maintenance person somewhere as a result of these changes that have been taking place. So I stepped up to the plate for this. Not only did I know there was business pain, but when I was training on day shift, I was in the line of fire of what was going wrong at night. Issues with the machine not being properly kept in working order or cleaned or whatever, pallets and shrink wrap left in places they shouldn't be, getting clobbered first thing in the morning because the machine wasn't run enough on the previous shift, so a lot of stuff came down the conveyor the minute you applied power, and the overall feeling that the other folks running the machine weren't really your teammates. And that is huge in this part of the building. If you cannot work with others, this area is not for you. It is an absolute team sport. Matter of fact, long time ago, when I was involved in this area of the building, it was like being on a sports team, and I believe we had some pretty rowdy people that wore jerseys at one point. Yeah, team shipping jerseys. I am very familiar with the need to communicate with folks, make eye contact with them if you're on equipment, acknowledge each other's presence, work safely, and overall, always keep in mind how you can help the other person do their job while you're trying to do yours. There is no other way that this part of the building works. But let's get back to where I've come from in order to do this kind of stuff. So I stepped up to the plate for this. I recognized that I could meet this need, so to speak, and really solve this business pain, particularly when I started getting up to speed on things. And then I proceeded to train on the other shift and completely and totally destroy my energy levels, my ability to do stuff on the weekends, and my sleep schedule, because I had to temporarily become a morning person again. Z-Quil was the only reason I got any sleep last autumn, and it took a while for me to be able to get to sleep again without Z-Quil. And even now it's a bit of a struggle, particularly since the hours have been fluctuating a bit here and there. We've had to stay late some nights. We've had some early nights, and with New Year's Eve, it's a half a shift, and we start early. So more work to do on that as well. I also nuked all the time off that I had and then nuked it again so I could dive head first into the job and get up to speed on stuff like this. So this has been a very serious commitment on my part, and the response that I've gotten, particularly since coming back to night shift, has been absurdly disrespectful. It could also be absurdly naive if folks don't know this side of the story, and maybe some of them tune in and hear this for the first time. But this was a very serious thing that I chose to step up to the plate for, and I was going to take it seriously no matter what. You have to want to get better at this stuff in order to be successful running this machine and the other assorted tasks. You have to communicate. You have to make sure that the supervisor is constantly talking to you about how you're doing. Do you need help with some things? Do we have to delegate some of the side tasks that are supposed to be done when the machine isn't operational? You have to step up to the plate, take things seriously, want to get better, have some positive zeal, take some initiative, and want to be a real pro at what it is that you do in order to do well with this machine. So if anybody happens to listen to this who thinks I'm a hard ass or a tightwad or whatever the insult is, there are very, very good reasons behind it. Alternatively, with the changing generations comes a changing attitude towards work. Like I said, less drama, more timidity. But here's the wild card of all of this. If these folks can get some of these newer folks who are timid to stick around and train them to where they're within some margin of whatever of the folks that are good at their jobs but at a cost, what do you say to that? How do you deal with something like that? I don't think anybody who is persistently picking apart the way that I've dove headfirst into getting good at this job, I don't think any of the folks, the same people with the same issues over and over again, have really considered this, because otherwise they'd be acting differently. Because times are changing and you have to acknowledge the changes, respect the changes, know how to deal with the changes in order to not get left behind. There are some lessons that I'm going to have to learn from the Gen Zs, and I have to be open-minded enough to learn them. We've already seen with the whole OK Boomer thing what can happen when a generation wants to be antagonistic towards the folks that came after them. So if we don't want to repeat the same mistake, that means us millennials and other folks have to be open-minded to the way things are changing and the way things have changed. It is in light of this that I look forward to the 2020s, because when all is said and done, I want these persistent, never-ending frustrations, feelings of hopelessness, spending the bulk of the decade feeling like running up a down escalator, to all be left in the 2010s where they belong. Can I do better? Yes. Can I spring for some opportunities? Yes. Should I be open-minded and looking to move forward with things? Yes. And with that sort of thing is not letting the folks who want to be antagonistic to my interest in bettering myself have the last word. Even the guy who's, I believe, a young boomer, had a steady career since the mid-1980s, thinks that there's no way I can better my situation if I stay involved in stuff like what I'm doing with this channel? No, I can't let people like this have the last word, and I'm not going to. There was a saying a while back when the New England Patriots won one of their various Super Bowls that they won over the past several years. And it was, "We are all patriots." Kind of being, oh yeah, you may not like the team, but, we're all proud American folks, or whatever it was, whatever the meaning was behind all of that. That was just the way I viewed it anyways. But to an extent, no matter what it is that we do for a living, we are all business folks. Yeah, sure, formal business background. Could probably be a manager at the right place at some point with the experience that I have. Could probably pursue other opportunities and advance in various career fields besides this warehouse stuff. But ultimately, we have to deal with the business side of what it is that we do every single day. The talent market. The parallels between hiring an employee and selling a product or service, like customer satisfaction and customer retention, etc. Eventually, we have to acknowledge this business stuff, even if we're not versed in it, because it's just the way that the world works. It's the way business is conducted. And I think as the 2010s draw to a close, that I've been a little too influenced by the doldrums of the layoff period and the Great Recession, and the nonsense that happened in the earlier part of this decade. But at this point, that was years ago. It's time to move forward. 2020 is a new year, and a new decade, and I want to make this count. Thanks for listening, everybody. This is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.